Thanks. Welcome to the Dave Show Midstream Reading Series. My name is Richard Terrill. We want to, as always, thank Unity Unitarian for this great room and for the setting of things up for us. All we have to do is show up, or in this case, show up and play. But we appreciate their kindness for being our home. We also want you to know that we have a website, the midstreamreadingseries.wordpress.org. Come. And on it you will find a recording of this reading and of past readings and also notice of the future readings. Sound in this room is a little tricky, so I'm going to ask the readers to swallow the mic, get out your FM voice if you have to, and if you can't hear, it's okay. Just
let us know.
Let the readers know, okay, and we'll do something. Turn it up to 11. Worked for Spinal Tap. Okay, louder. Yeah. We also have a mailing list, and if you're not on it and would like to be on it, please put your name and email address on this pad that I'll send around. Write legibly, as your fifth grade teacher told you, and we'll put you on the mailing list. We only send out 2 mailings per month, and that's all. We won't bug you. We don't sell the list or anything like that. Books are for sale over here on this table. The bathrooms are down the hall, as always. They're always down the hall. You go down here, take a right, and then take another right, and there are a couple of all-gender bathrooms basically over there. Okay, and among other things, we're celebrating this anthology, Broad Wings, Long Legs, a rookery of Heron poems. Do you have a launch date yet? You'll tell us about it later. But
this is it.
No, it isn't.
The first reading, we don't have a big pageant planned just yet.
Okay, but there will be a big pageant later, so we're just getting warmed up. And I'm going to read the poem that I have in it, even though I know I've read it here before, maybe even twice. But if your memory is like mine, you won't remember it anyway. So it's always new. And a heron just it's actually not a heron, but it's a similar bird, makes a cameo appearance. This is called the Lake, and it's after William Butler Yeats' The Lake Isle of Innisfree. But I've Wisconsinized it. The Lake after Yeats. I'm getting up soon and going to the lake, where my father's cabin leans toward the north. More chinks between the logs than last year's newsprint could patch. Old kitchen pots on the front room floor to catch the roof's leaks. I'll catch black bass after dark in the lily pads. And each day my father will talk about hunting birds this fall, and my mother will read a book and occasionally remember dreaming. It's a place of such anticipation, as when morning lifts its dew over the grass in August, and over blueberries too small in the wetlands, never grown sweet, and the bittern standing on one leg, and the loon sane as day. The mosquito buzz at evening sends us indoors, mostly safely. Everyone knows that joke, and the holes in the rusted screens. Okay, I'm getting up now, because for days I've heard the frogs awakening, and the blackbird's fine syllables, and the few cars on the road hidden behind the young red pines. I'm down that road, away, always away now, and looking toward its farthest bend. Diane Jarvenpa, who you've already heard from, is the author of 6 books of poetry, her most recent, Shylands, published by Blue Light Press of San Francisco. She has received the Midwest Independent Publishers Association Award and Artist Initiative grants from the Minnesota State Arts Board. She is a teaching artist with the Alzheimer's Poetry Project Minnesota and the East Side Arts Council. As a singer-songwriter, she performs and records under the name Diane Jarvenpa and has received a McKnight McPhail Performing Fellowship and was the recipient of a 50 over 50 Minnesotans Award from Pollen Midwest and AARP Minnesota. Diane Jarvenpa.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of celebrating this beautiful anthology that Jim put together. And there he goes. So I thought I would read my poem from it. I love this book. I think it's so beautiful. So beautiful. So I was at the Boundary Waters and one year and driving back towards Ely. And then I came across this experience there. And I guess that's all I need to say about it. You never get to be really close to egrets. I mean, I have come pretty close because they're not always that shy, but never this close. There was that egret by the side of the road. The feathers seemed tokens of the sky, sewn in another atmosphere, shining threads of the moon, plumes of an infallible cloud. And the beak, that color of yellow seen in tropical fruit or a painting of lemons, but softer, an enameled daylily or narcissus. Its elegant scissor long and brilliant, hard not to think of a master craftsman. The legs sectioned off like the advance of history, lean and angular stems of ironwood. The pure dark power of those feet forking through reeds, pushing off the bristle rind of the marsh. The closed eye, a perfect seam stitched by a comet tail under a roundel of dim stars. Once oiled and keen to flicks of glintfish, now shut to the columns of fur above, the crunch of white gravel below, and to my hands that lifted off the side of the road to a shadowy sling of weeds, left to hold and consider the airy hinge and bone, helpless silver hush of those lustrous wings. So I thought I'd share kind of a newer poem. I wrote it actually in August, and I don't know, there's probably some real serious birders in this room, so you probably know, do you know the Minnesota Birdcast? Is that like a real deal? I mean, is it accurate? Because I look at it all the time, particularly during migration times, and when I wrote this, it said the night before, so that would have been probably, well, maybe it was the 10th of August or October, 12,337,600 birds crossed Minnesota that night. And I looked it up for last night, because they will show it the next day. It was 137,600 birds that crossed. This was like Anoka, Minnesota. So this poem is called Migration. The levitation after the let go, almost an apology to the branch left behind. The spread of coverts, lift in air conjured, that new abandon churned from boreal to ether. Each arc another notation written, plumage of a spirit ghost, ripping cloud. The business of arrow, business of that cross, angels knifing their way below wind rivers. Spread broad-wing herons in slow descent, pre-Wright brothers' ingenuity. Cloisters of sawets smaller than leaf drop, night beat invocation in secret low flying firmament. What does the flight manual tell us? Fly from fire, from hubris of humans, enter the hum, follow the song that scrolls the next chapter. All those nights, with all those hollow bones stirring it up, with those million others, and the stars breaking apart all the old stories, those memories to run from or to. I thought Jim said maybe river poems, and I thought, yeah, I have a few river poems, so I think. Or do I? I think I got a couple. I do have one that references rivers and references egrets. Does that count? It also references a whole lot of other things, including cicadas, because, hey, guess what? What's coming? I know, this is the year of cicadas, and it was also the year of cicadas when I wrote this, maybe not as major. And so it's a poem about when your kid sprouts wings and takes off for college, but also about all kinds of other things here. To shine an answer as my daughter goes off to college. I cracked open my motherhood and out flew my daughter. She had wings, a tattoo, and was singing Stoned at the nail salon. Off she went over the pigeons, quadrupled up on the freeway lights to keep warm, those hosts of plague and crispy skin on a skillet. She banked over the single deer, self-deposited on the city street, leaping over entire lawns and plastic kid toys. She flew over way too many cornfields, the barometer of America's love for sweet syrup and Republicans, slowed her speed over blue highways and pie shops, lazily circled over rivers that once held trout, hovered over county fairs with carnies that guessed what your kid after high school, college, military training, band breakups will do. Past deep forests thick with pine that seem to misdirect but really are muses for the natural order of things. She met up with egrets, precise and brilliant, like if Emily Dickinson could fly. Finally, she entered the time and place of the cicadas, swarms of fat bodies singing their buzzsaws into thick warm air, telling all about those 17 years in union with the earth, waiting, swearing it will be soon. Yes, it will. Just one more argument with that underground oblivion before it all split, and the hot star poured over every wet wing. And there she landed with her minimalist adult signature and those piled up years of tender field notes, common sense words written under the incandescent lamp of a pandemic. All that to climb out of the complicated casings of childhood and feel this sun like a thing to eat, a thing to hoard, and enjoy the holy praise of this newly magnificent den. Just one more. You've seen so much of me already. Oh my gosh. So this is called Baptism River, and these two poems were out of my new book. It's not so new anymore, but last year it was. But thank you, Jim, for putting together. I'm just a bird nut, and I'm not a birder, but I have a novel all about a birder. So, what nerve? But I love. I was raised by a conservationist and a poet, and they walk with me every day. They've been gone a long time, but they influence me every day. Baptism River, which is where my dad worked for the DNR. He worked on building it up so it was viable for trout. Baptism River, as if it knows the sun is a thing that points out complacency. Cold lips of water roll over floating marigolds, a supple telling of how the wet world opens and closes. Silver rapids beat half rhymes into stone with new strung verbs, slippery litanies, and how it frills out matter, refashions hunger, hands back moonlight. Particles, atoms, and elements stirred inside its fluid tongue, to pour it all over ice, dump it like the magnanimous instrument of jamboree it is, droplet and surge, sober and wild. How it keeps telling us to get over it already, more pain and stories and dreams to come. How past swirls and collects, how future spills on. Thank you.
is Diane Jarvenpa. James Armstrong is the author of 3 poetry books: Monument in a Summer Hat from 1999, Blue Lash 2006, and Empire 2023. He is also the co-author with Kim Chapman of a book of essays, Nature, Culture, and Two Friends Talking. Armstrong has published poems in Tri-Quarterly, Gulf Coast, Orion, the New York Times Book Review, Poetry East, Split Rock Review, Terrain.org, and elsewhere. He is a recipient of the Penn New England Discovery Prize, an Illinois Arts Council Fellowship, and a Minnesota State Arts Board Fellowship in Poetry. Armstrong lives in Winona, Minnesota, where he was professor of English at Winona State University for 24 years. He was Winona's first poet laureate and is one of the founders of the Maria W. Faust Sonnet Contest. You can learn more about him and his work at jamesarmstrongpoet.com. James Armstrong.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks, Jim, for this great anthology. It's good to be here tonight. I assume all of you are bird nuts, yes? Oh, yes.
Wing.
Wing nuts, absolutely. So I'm going to start with, actually, first I'm going to get out my timer. 15 minutes. We're going to stick to that. All right, so because my name is Armstrong, I got to be first in the book, so easy to find. This poem is called Flotsam and Jetsam, which are actual nautical terms. Flotsam is that which is debris not deliberately thrown overboard. Jetsam is stuff that you deliberately throw overboard. But this is a beachcomber poem. It was written on Grand Island. Anyone been to Grand Island in Munising Bay and the Upper Peninsula? I had an artisan residency gig there for 2 weeks in a decaying mansion with no running water and a lot of mice and 2 young children and my wife, and we managed to make it through. But it's a beautiful sand island, and we spent a lot of time on the beach. So if you're a beachcomber, you'll recognize the plot here, which is basically you walk along and find stuff. Flotsam and Jetsam. The morning beach is draped with detritus in a sinuous conga line. Delicate cedar roots, fir cones, alder leaves, stray bits of driftwood whose smooth hydraulic shapes look like car hoods from the 30s. Scrolls of birch bark that carry the news from moose to moose. A few pale cigarette filters. A stray flap of mylar, somebody's birthday balloon once. A crayfish claw, mustaches of brown foam. These were flotsam, but they didn't drown. They're drying out on the sand like Crusoe or Jonah. The blue S of this dead heron, with his head in the foam, his articulate stilts run aground, so the small, clear surf pushes his accordion neck back and forth, drilling at cold nothing. Is he ashore or afloat? His feet are on dry land, his head in the trough of a wave, caught between dry dock and dream. It turns out I have a lot of birds in my poems. It was funny trying to come up with some poems that would be good to share, and I realized I have lots of birds, actually. So we're in April, but this is a March poem, and March in Minnesota, right? It's April's not the cruelest month, it's March. Two sandhill cranes in late March. We have a sandhill crane pair that comes and nests on just off Lake Winona. My wife and I walk around the lake every day of the year. Every morning we leave at 6 and get around the lake, and we watch the sandhill cranes raise their colt. It's pretty amazing. One of the great things about Winona, and it is Winona, not Winona. Winona is Judd. Winona is Winona Ryder, who was born there, just so you know.
I knew that. I did.
Two sandhill cranes in late March. On the muddy fisherman's path to the swollen river that spills its cold silver over the bank and breaches the ochre palisade, two abrupt silhouettes rise from the grass, incline their Martian foreheads, spread their black capes, open their sharp beaks, utter cries awkward and terrible, the wrenching of clapboards from some long-abandoned church, the shriek of nails pulled from the joists of the world. By the way, that last poem was from Blue Lash, which was a poem, all Lake Superior, all the time. If you love Lake Superior, Blue Lash is your book. This is my latest book, Empire. And this takes place on the San Antonio River. I don't know if you've ever been to the San Antonio River Walk, which is this lovely, yes, right? It's this beautiful walk that they built along this lovely river that winds through the middle of San Antonio, Texas. But it's also a highly managed landscape, let's just put it that way. And there are herons there. San Antonio River, and this gets Yeats in too. We must labor to be beautiful. W.B. Yeats. Texas, early spring, the river walk at 7 a.m. Bald cypresses and oaks unfurl their delicate green. The river's pace is languid. Two men steer a workboat cautiously upstream, bringing plastic flats of greenhouse annuals they'll use to replace those that failed to keep their loveliness intact. The men bring shovels, compost, tarps, yellow work gloves. The grumble of their engine disturbs the morning. When their wake arrives, it slaps the levee. Reflections undulate and fracture. Then the mirror grows still again. Above, in a cypress, a heron brings to its mate a stick. She tucks it carefully into place. 2. Matthew 8:20. Jesus saith unto him, the foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man knows not where to lay his head. On a bench by the river with a sleeping bag pulled over his head, only his torn Jordans stick out into the morning. The river's slack glamour trembles in the wind. Because the police haven't made their rounds, the man is deep in his dream beside a bridge, underlit with bright reflections. But privilege will clear away whatever troubles us. 2 doors down, in front of the Hard Rock Cafe, a waiter unchains the patio chairs and drags them out with a metallic screech. A workman turns a spigot and sluices off the piss smell of the night. What underwrites our peace? In equal parts, ruthlessness and calibrated innocence. That struck a nerve, I guess. Yes, well, that was the beginning of the pandemic. I was in San Antonio going to the Associated Writing Programs Conference, and when I got there, the pandemic began, and every day more and more people began leaving, and panels were canceled, books were being unsold, and on my way back, and I drove down there, and on my way back from Texas, the plague followed me all the way to Winona. By the time I got to Winona, everything had been canceled and shut down. So then you remember what that was like, right? Birding in the pandemic. Dawn breeze scuffs the lake. A hunting pack of pied-billed grebes appears and disappears in the gray chop. Last night, too much whiskey, too much news. I have a hangover. Or is it a fever? I side-eye the jogger who coughs coming up the path. Remember? Remember when you guys were wearing like bandanas as we went running, thinking I was going to do something? I side-eye the jogger who coughs coming up the path. The chickadee voluble, cheery fluff in the top branches of an ornamental plum calls for normal relations. Was it naive to know the world has always been a dark thicket and not to think I would be made to feel it? It's hard to feel it at the top.
Wow.
Thank you. You remember what it was like, though, the pandemic, right? When all the animals got to be outdoors and do whatever they wanted, and we were all in our houses looking at them. October 2020. Yesterday was my birthday. Sudden snow, fine-grained and wet, blurred the leaves of the Norway maple and slicked to the sidewalk. A mixed message in a difficult season. Should I linger or press right on into the dark? This was the fall we heard whitethroats tuning up before sunrise in the reeds by Highway 61. A flutes-only orchestra. Silent road. This was the fall we saw the beaver slowly swimming west just offshore, etching the lake with a widening V. This was the fall we saw a wolf cross the median. This was the fall we nervously counted yard signs and face masks lying among the fallen leaves. Thank you. And then, of course, November 8th, 2020. You may remember that day. Also, I got a bird into that poem. The Count. An eagle in a tree halfway up the bluff, at this distance, a grain of rice. But once I've seen it, I can find it again. Last night, speeches out of Wilmington, fireworks, a flight of drones spelled out the politician's name against the Atlantic darkness. This morning is weirdly calm. The sun casts long shadows across orange hills. The still lake trembles at the cartwheel of a leaf. All I can think of is a friend who sat once in a pre-dawn Michigan wood, shotgun across his lap. Light filled the spaces between bare treetops. A chickadee tried out a call. My friend reached to scratch his neck, and the morning exploded, throwing splinters and bark 2 inches from his head. Some idiot downrange, drunk or half blind. What my friend couldn't shake for a long time, the thud of that decision burrowing into heartwood. Thank you. Well, we don't want to leave you there. I mean, well, hopefully we'll have a repeat of that count this November. And we'll get drones again, and we'll all say, "Oh, the Wicked Witch is dead," or whatever we'll say. But I don't want to leave you in that place. Let's leave you in the garden. Right? It's time to start planting. This is called Against the Gnostics. The Gnostics, that they were heretics who believed that this world, this material world, was irredeemably evil, created by an evil demiurge. And we had to get beyond it. We had to go somewhere else. Part of our heritage of dualism, right? Against the Gnostics. We water the garden in the dusk. The sprinkler's fantail, a shimmer of beads, arches over the orbs of the tomatoes and the basil's dense umbrellas, the sulphurous, fluttery tubas of the squash blossoms, until the earth turns moist and then exhales its mouthwash of fungus and chocolate, the fervid tang of worms. At the end of 15 minutes, the spigot squeaks. For a long time after, there is only the sound of water dripping from the Presbyterian leaves. A robin runs the rows in his saffron leggings, probing for dinner, soiling his breast with the world.
was James Armstrong. Emily Bright's poetry collection, Fierce Delight, Poems of Early Motherhood, is forthcoming from North Star Press this spring. And she brings her own crowd. Always. She is a weekend host on NPR News, where she also produces 2 long-running weekly arts and book series, Art Hounds and Ask a Bookseller. Emily holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Minnesota and a BA in English from Williams College. She's also the author of a poetry chapbook, Glances Back, which I glance and see over there, and co-author of the book, Powerful Ideas in Teaching, Creating Environments Where Students Want to Learn. Emily Bright.
Thank you, friends and family. You know, I posted this on Facebook, of course, and a friend of mine in New York was like, the opening is a live jazz set? You've arrived. So thank you for that moment. So they haven't mentioned this yet, but the cool thing about this collection is if you look in the top corner, you can make the heron fly. You're all going to be doing that now. And the cool thing about having a B name is I come after Robert Bly with his collection, so I'll take it. I'm going to take you to Maine, to the coast of Maine. I grew up in New England and grew up visiting my grandparents there. It's my favorite place. And this is a little snippet about something wild and kind of dangerous that my husband convinced me to do. It's called Midnight Kayak Ride. My sister just went, oh yeah. How many lights in blackness Jupiter has set, the Milky Way winds clear as any road. Bioluminescence streams out from my bow, eddies with each paddle dip. I scan for your brief lighted trail, find you almost close enough to touch. We are skimming on the surface of 1,000 interactions. A lobster creeps into a trap. A heron, folded infinitely still, coils for the sudden strike. A fish snatched mid-stroke. A supernova ruptures millions of years off. And yes, I have always been afraid of sharks and sudden accidents. I would not have come tonight, except you shouldered your kayak down the beach and paused at the silent edge of water. Down the bay, the seals roil, grumbling like stomachs. I keep having to remember how much is alive, how we are alive inside it. I paddle to you and we sit, night-blinded, kayaks linked, while the ocean carries us like driftwood down the bay. Thank you. Jim, why is people texting me now? I just have it for the timing.
It's a group thread, it's my fault.
Literally in the room. Probably said, great poem, thanks, Katie. Jim, I'll see your dead heron and raise you a lot of dead fish. We're gonna stay in Maine here. This is what is revealed, what is washed away. When I wake, we are surrounded. All the sea beyond this point of land whitewashed with fog. Even the hum of lobster boats, the conversation of gulls has been reverently tamped down. I am not an early riser, but the cold shook me from my quilts, demanded attention. The ocean breathes and cozies into shoals. A groan, which could be seal or dock, the clap of wings against water. Yesterday, the tide delivered hundreds of dead fish. They pockmarked the bay, white-bellied, reeking, bait fish whose oil once burned bright as whales, whose planted flesh helped corn and squash grow, cast-offs from a careless trawler. It took hours for the gulls to find them. We dipped kayak paddles past the wreckage, each fish long as my forearm. They floated, even ripped in two, even with their feathered bones exposed. This early morning across the bay, the tips of evergreens declare themselves. The fog thins quickly after that. Boats emerge, the docks, the birds, their wings applaud against the surface. taking flight. Their volume rises toward the day, and on the surface of the water, not a single fish. I read something from my chapbook, which is called Glances Back. From the stillness of the morning, we go to a night scene inland. Have you ever come across a rope swing that somebody has lovingly, precariously, perhaps long ago, hung way up high on a tree branch over the water, and you imagine all the stories that entails? Rope swing, June 17th. I'd like to write an elegy for the boys swimming in the reservoir that night I could not sleep. Walking without direction through the dark, around the trees that hide the road, I caught the arc of bodies in the air in sweet, unordered rhythm. One by one they paused, suspended by the rope that held them to the land, then plunged kicking into water. I'd like to write an elegy for those boys who cycled between air and water with little splashes. They knew that when we fall, each organ fights against it, pushing up into our throats. I fear rocks in shallow places for their sake. To all the grieving wives and parents stuck repeating, he had hopes, he built, he wrote, he wanted to see Venice. I want to tell them of the boys in jeans dripping, if not there and then, in another pond. Bigger, smaller, the same night swim repeated. In the shadow, I give them lives. I tell them, I have remembered all along the way you climbed the bank up to the tree trunk, carrying that knotted rope, stood looking at the night, then took a breath. If I talk at the slantwise, is that a little better? I'm too trained to stand closer to it's a radio experience. Who here writes? Some hands. Who here has had somebody give them a suggestion of what to write? This is called When People Know You for a Poet. It can happen anywhere. Friends or neighbors telling you the news and weather, sag into a tale whose end your arms anticipate like a box of weights. You should write a poem about this. They grin in expectation. Say it's Sunday, and the altar candles have been struggling all sermon, one extinguished, the other threatening to snuff the symbolic presence of God, until an altar boy, pressed into action by a nervous deacon, scurries up an offering with a lighter. Afterwards, you're standing with your coffee and your pleasant greetings when they circle, hope-eyed. It's a poem about duty, says the deacon. Who's been slacking off behind the scenes, forgetting to trim the wicks? It's not an accusation from his lips, but eager mystery. He knows everything important happens behind the scenes. Someone skips the benediction weekly to make coffee. Someone sharpens pencils in the pews so we can scribble prayers on strips of bulletin, find them folded in our pants on laundry day, and pray. I don't know how it would go, says a woman, small and gray, whose name you nearly remember. It would say something about love and how difficult it is sometimes. And the poem would end with a little boy rushing to bring light. Do not tell them no. Do not joke that it takes more than a word in the beginning, nor speak to them of yesterday's fiasco when you drank too much coffee and could do nothing to improve a blank screen. Nod your head. Agree that they have spotted something tremulous and rich, tucked within the everyday. They did not have to tell you this. Thank them for the gift. And this is based on a story that someone told me, although not with that tagline because my parents know better. But this is a story I learned about my family during the pandemic, and someday I want to write a novel about it. But for now, you get a poem. It's called How They Met. Let me tell you my pandemic story. I promise it's not the one you think. I mean, way back. The flu that only neutral Spain had the guts to document during the World War and so got saddled with the name. 1918, people in their prime falling like stars and just as quickly. I don't need to paint that picture, primed as we have been for tragedy, except to add the uniforms. Smart lines, matching hats, the crease just so. Picture him, small and trim, enlisted in his best hope forward from the orphanage. Picture her, the darling baby of the family, full-grown and persuasive, which is to say, somehow her parents gave her range to volunteer with the Red Cross. They met in ambulances, ferrying the sick. This is true. I wonder if they thought about the risk. I wonder where the lines of duty and compassion met, where purpose and bravado. Why does anyone serve others? Picture an apple shared, a chocolate bar, a taste of gallows humor. At some point, they became more social and less distanced. Her parents bemoaned his upbringing. Still, they pulled it off. The pandemic found its end after so many others' endings, and they lived. They carved a life together. They produced my grandfather. Think of all the kindnesses that paved our paths, yours and mine. The words of comfort murmured to the sick, the ambulances that arrived in time, the company within that made the task of healing light. I have one final poem for you. All of these lovely, printed papers I'm reading from, these are all part of my book that's coming out next year, which is, many of them are capturing moments of early motherhood. And so I have to leave you with one of those. And I'd love to have it be a beautiful scene with a river, but this takes place at the construction site that popped up behind the home we were renting when my daughter was 2, which she thought was amazing. Let me tell you, you haven't lived till you spent an afternoon watching the cement bed footing being laid with a kid all morning. And you're just like, this is amazing. So, this is called, and thank you so much, everybody. This is called A Meadow for a Memory. My husband and my daughter are strolling after dinner through the lot behind our house. They investigate the dirt piles. They gather rocks like endless treasure. In a moment, I will have to call her in for bed. I cross my arms against the chill, try to memorize the scene. The way they wobble over rutted ground, her head just high enough to rest his hand upon, which he does reflexively, stroking the wild blondish fuzz that he passed down to her. I will erase the cars that whoosh past the border of the lot, erase her napless afternoon, the looming bedtime hour that might, but probably won't go smoothly. Wouldn't flowers be more scenic than lumber and a construction crane? Now they're pausing to examine the grooves the trucks have left behind. They recite the storybook we've read 3 times today. I don't think I'll remember that. If I have my way, just the indistinct and happy murmur of their voices, the smoke of our pine campfire. Let them be. 5 minutes more. Let the dirt puff over her yellow rain boots, dusting her pajamas, which I had hoped to keep clean for bed. Let every detail fade, save this. Just a father and his little girl, my 2 beloveds, ambling while the sun lingers behind.
It was Emily Bright. Unitarian lets us use this spot, this room, without charge. However, we like to throw in a little something in gratitude for this lovely room and the speaker and the microphone and everything else to support their work and also their expenses for having us here. So if you're of a mind I'll pass this around. So while we're doing that, I've learned two things. One, that Emily's book is next spring, not this spring, and it's Winona, not Winona. Also, afterwards tonight, we have books for sale if you want to chat with the writers, and some of us will retire to Sweeney's, which is conveniently located only a few blocks from here, for a libation. I know there's going to be at least two of us there. And one is me, the other is our next reader. His editorship, James Silas Rogers, bills himself tonight as a very local essayist and poet since he lives less than 4 blocks from here. And probably 4 blocks from Sweeney's. 5 of his essays have been named a notable in the annual Best American Essays volumes, and his mixed genre collection about cemeteries, Northern Orchards, Places Near the Dead, was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award in memoir. He is the author of a chapbook of poems, Sundogs, and a full-length volume of poetry, The Collector of Shadows. Most recently, he conceived of and edited the anthology Broad Wings, Long Legs that we are celebrating tonight. James Silas Rogers.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. What wonderful readers. What wonderful event. And again, one of the problems when you put together an anthology that has 55 people in it is who do you select? I let Richard do the inviting, but there's at least 5 of you here tonight who are also in the book, who could have a flash poetry reading afterwards if you wanted to convene. Michael and Mary and who else is there? Pat right here, yeah. So it's great. The book actually, it's striking to me how much the pandemic came up in our conversation. So I have to do it, James, to put my time here. So, because this book is also a child of the pandemic. In the first weeks of the pandemic, when I had been a fairly regular attendee at literary events and readings and the like, and that all dried up instantly, I thought, well, how am I going to keep my hand in the poetry world, in the writing world? And I thought back to a remark that Denise Levertov made, which was that any poet in the Pacific Northwest will eventually write a poem about a great blue heron. And I thought, well, maybe that's true about Minnesota, so I sent out a few emails, and before I knew it, I was bombarded with heron poems. And I want to apologize to the many good poets who I just, for whatever reason, didn't contact, but again, it is remarkable because herons they're a very evocative bird. They're an iconic bird. There's something I say in the introduction that, sometimes they're front and center in the poem, and sometimes they are just seem incidental, but poetry, like nature, has no throwaway parts, and that's the way we have to remember about herons. So let me just read a few poems. I'm an ardent birder, and so my contribution is a poem on the Cannon River. And it's actually been around a long time. It was in I think this is the 5th time I've recycled this poem. I have limited stock, On the Cannon River. Herons, attended only by their shadows, stand on low mud slopes, wait among scuffed clamshells and gravel at points where the river bends. Birds alone, our quiet passing canoe untethers their blue-gray forms. They lift and in solemn, slow strokes row the air, move downstream. Without wanting, we chase a great blue for miles in pursuit of solitude. I'm not sure which of us is pursuing the solitude there, but I regret that I have only one other poem that mentions a heron, but I have it here. So this is a poem called Predictability, and it's very much a poem about, as much of what I like to write is about the seasons. Predictability. I have to do something that I don't like doing here with this poem, which is I have to gloss a word, and the word is yumato at the back. It's an art historical term. It means smokiness, and I agonized about whether I should put that word in there or not. Henry James said once that he spent an afternoon trying to decide whether a character was penniless or without a penny. And I spent a full 2 weeks before I decided to include this word. And then I said, well, hell, if you got a word like that, you really should use it. Predictability. There are places in time, moments you know you will meet again, more or less the same way you expect to see great blue herons at the river's edge, or snow at Christmas, or pillbugs under an overturned rock. Moments like after the rain, beaded grass, the clean smell of the still wet asphalt street, the startle of a scooping nighthawk's bleat, or the blackbirds grouping late August when the year surrenders to weediness, and you find browning apple husks emptied by wasps on the tree. In unmowed places, blooms of milkweed and boneset hang like clouds. In the verge of the railroad right-of-way, the noonday sfumato of goldenrod. Word. I think just throwing it to your dictionary. Well, that's not so bad. Here's a poem. I write a lot about birds, and here's a poem. Actually, I hadn't thought about this. This is for your colleague Peter Cox's grandmother. This yeah, I hadn't thought of that until you got talking. This is a poem. It's based on a true story. It's one of the poems that sometimes life just hands you these things. It's called Window Kills. Window Kills. After we had gone through the closet, winnowing all but the finest of clothes, suitable to be buried in with our unspoken thought, and allowed the bills to arrive in a bolus at month's end until unforeseen debts could no longer slap us in the face. After we had pieced together an address book of sorts out of old envelopes and paper scraps tucked in the desk, after we'd come to believe we had tidied up our mother's life, we opened the freezer. In the frosty dark, we found a dozen or more bird cadavers, songbirds that had dropped X number of stories to the streets, only feathers to cushion their crash landing. When Icarus fell, there was at least a sense that balance had been restored, hubris given its due comeuppance. Not so these fallen creatures. The worst this purple finch had done was mistake its reflection for another bird and lost that game of flinch. Hardly a capital offense to be misled, but office towers scarcely care. But she did. Taxidermy may be a feeble hope, yet it was the hope she held. We thought of her lifting a lifeless bird off the sidewalk, carrying it home in her purse with her lipstick, her compact, her keys. The poet was right. Hope is the thing with feathers. She kept her wish for restoration frozen, stacked like ears of sweet corn, kept a rock-hard fire-orange oriole, kept woodpeckers that once could drill their way through 100-year oak, found dead after one sick flood, kept a bead emerald hummingbird that now looked like a sausage encrusted with freezer burn, and a redstart that must have been skipping through air one crystal morning when it simply suddenly stopped. Here's a poem. Actually, it dates from March 14th. I remember the day I wrote it, March 14th, early spring, and there really is nothing like Minnesota March when that and robins are overrated. Robins are taking over the world, we bird watchers know, but the real sign of spring is the red-winged blackbird, and absolutely the red-winged blackbird. And this was when I heard the first red-winged blackbird of the year. I had something in mind here, something that when I wrote this poem, it's called In Early Spring. I thought about something that Philip Larkin said, that if I were making a religion, I would make water my sacrament. And I had the pond water remembers, is what, in early spring. Pond water remembers. It welcomes back Canada's coots, their redwings and their trill. It waits for the peepers in hope. It remembers the day each year when nothing remains to melt, remembers the half-life of ice splintering into honeycombs. Pond water remembers the shape of the shore, remembers to rise into the reeds. It knows that last year's green will be captured by mud and finds comfort in the triumph of rot. Pond water remembers the rain and is grateful when it falls, grateful like a runner drinking deep at the end of a race. Pond water surrenders to ripples, opens its palms to feel the winds and the breeze, the kisses of dragonflies. There's so many bird poems in here, I hardly know. I can poke my finger in. And I had a wonderful grandmother. And one thing I'm really grateful for my family is that my grandmother taught me, and my father and others taught me, to appreciate nature. And she grew up in Kentucky, and she had a very ambivalent relationship to Kentucky. She thought of it as being a loutish, ignorant, violent, brutal place. But she also watched the Kentucky Derby every year and cried when they played my old Kentucky home. And but here's the one about one of the sad things when she was a child with the boys. Well, it explains itself. My grandmother's childhood. In each paintless Kentucky village of her youth, she cried when wanton boys turned bird's nest into litter. Bluebird chicks spilled as from a kicked bucket and left to squall, their helpless chirps lasting the afternoon. Eggs splattered like tobacco spit on a rock. She wept and was told there was nothing to weep for. The boys were only birding. It's a somewhat more cheering poem about, I got lots of time here. So, late days of June. With this one summer, we made like a prayerful visitation every night to a barred owl down on the seminary grounds at the end of Summit. So, that summer, we saw the barred owl a dozen times, always in the evening near the grotto. It would have selected a branch on which to pause and be backlit above us at maybe twice the height of a man, moving only now and then with a pivot of its head. Mosquitoes came in swarms. We didn't swat or even move for fear of chasing the owl away. Watching the owl on those long late days after the solstice, when daylight seems to evaporate, was like watching a bloom about to break, tense like a strung instrument now at rest, taut as the morning stillness of a lake. All right, here's a bird. Here's one. There is a bird here. Oh no, there isn't a bird in this one. Oh no. Well, I'll read this one. On the opposite page, there's a bird. There's a bird. I was in Ireland some years ago, and in winter, it turned out to be, I led a student group at St. Thomas to Ireland. Turned out to be the coldest winter in 65 years. And one night the students couldn't do anything, and my friend we were out very late in Kilkenny, and this is a poem about that. It's a late night in Kilkenny. My late wife directed to. I was trying to remember the name of the Arctic bird that flies the farthest, nearly from pole to pole, as if hungry for daylight. It was almost 2 a.m. You were an ocean and a half continent away. 2 a.m, and me fumbling to recall the name of that plover or shorebird, but I was certain then that I knew the order and the rhythms of your day, our places ruptured but still linked. I knew what you were doing back in Minnesota, the dinner you likely made, and when you'd go to bed. Crossing the River Nore in the foggy Irish dark, I saw seabirds in a cluster, 20 or 30 gulls and terns arranged on a shelf of ice downstream, arranged as tidy as a place setting or knickknacks on some old woman's mantle. Here in Kilkenny, the Guinness and the lateness of the hour stirred my thoughts going over the bridge, then got muddied up with those birds who travel such extraordinary distance, who are so motionless on the ice. All of this made a kind of sense at the time. This morning, all I am is lonely. One of my many attempts to write a good hangover poem. Further research is needed. Actually, it's not in this book, but I do have a really good hangover poem about seeing a blue jay in the morning. Let's see. Here's a winter poem. Involved the bird as well. Occasional gifts. Though most of the time it's work, if you have a talent for what they call hunkering down, then late January can afford a sort of contentment. The sort Thoreau said he found in the Maine woods, or which travelers report on ocean crossings. These weeks, we scavenge through long winter days to find a flourish that redeems this hard season. How the sun, like a backlit scrim, might glow through the afternoon gray. Once in a while, a surprise. A red-shouldered hawk in the backyard tearing apart a squirrel's carcass. Later, a band of cirrus clouds ribbed with the same pale marbling of that hawk's breast feathers. And later still, you recall the look of icy wildness as it lifted its wings, a whisper of another world. So, this is the first time the book has been read from, if that's proper English. The first time we've read from the book publicly. I do have a couple of events coming up. One is at the Grand Hand Gallery on May 9th with, at 5 o'clock. The first three events are all within 4 blocks of my house, but I am willing to travel if there are other events. And then one at the University Club, Tim Nolan is going to invite a complete raft of poets from this to do, probably that'll be the first formal launch at the University Club on May 21st. But I'm open to other things, so if you're interested in engaging a reading, we'll do the dance of the 7 herons or something for you. Okay, here's a nice, I'll close with a April poem about this time of year. And does it have I don't think it even has a bird in it, but it has a river in it. That's what I was more interested in, was a river in this. And it's a nice, it's a nice mournful, middle-age angst kind of poem. At the Falls of St. Anthony. April 19th, nearing dark, a mist that smells of mud, the sort you'd clear with one sweep of the wipers if it came to rest on your windshield. It drifts into the line of watchers stopped here and there along the bridge rail. On the east bank, above the city's oldest streets, now only restaurants and sushi bars, a neon sign flashes St. Anthony, Maine. To the west, in million-dollar condos, a few enjoy the view from their balcony. The evening sun falls on it all and on me, a middle-aged man walking among the young and old. Cyclists spin by and runners following their own circuits pass in a nimbus of aerobic health. A couple engages in the ageless ceremony of flirtation, she with a sky blue sweater draped over her shoulder like a vestment, like the costume of another country. A handful of young parents are out too, with their children strapped in strollers and slumped to one side asleep. As the moms and dads take a moment to stand and wonder at falling water, they keep one hand on the stroller handle, rocking it back and forth as the river passes underneath. We all gaze on the torrent. 100 currents collect, some quick, others dragging like slag on a vat of steel. I look on the couple next to me. He stands at her back, arms around her waist, and imagine that we find ourselves lost in the task of trying to track one or another of the streams that meld here at the brim of the spillway. The northern half of the state pours to this point, the spring runoff having scoured not just a snowpack, but also bridges, trees, islands, some farmers' best acres now missing, lost into the Mississippi, indistinct as water is in water. Antony's words, not the saint whose name was given to these falls, but the love-mad Roman. Utterly different men, and yet both tried to understand where things go when they vanish. The question occurs to me as well, watching the cold water drop. The dark river swallows the river, and no amount of praying, not even to the patron saint of lost objects, can bring it back. Oh, my America, this is where the lost continent went.
James Silas Rogers. Once again, a round of applause for all tonight's readers: Diane, Jarvenpa, James Armstrong, Emily Berry, James Silas. I remind you, we have books for sale, including the anthology. If you get to Sweeney's before the rest of us, try to get a table in the back room where it's a little quieter, so those of us who can't hear anything have a chance to be able to follow the conversation. And next month's Midstream, May 9th, we'll actually, in May and June, be in the center room on the first floor because there's something else, they need this room for something else. I can't imagine what it would be there. But, so next month, May 9th, Marg Walker welcomes Ali Schminke, John Schenk, Paula Nancaro, and Thomas R. Smith. Hope to see you then, and thank you for coming.